I'm Judith Silverthrorne. I'm a writer and I'm an author of 15 books. I write everything from picture books and children's novels to adult nonfiction, and I've written YA, young adult fiction as well. And I enjoy teaching writing workshops, and I edit for people as well. So I'm going to tell you today a little bit about how to get started writing. I know people are really finding it a good way to express themselves, whether it's creatively or through nonfiction, memoirs, or whatever it is. And it doesn't really matter what you're writing. There's always a process that you need to go through, or that you will go through as you progress. So to start with, there's the idea. So where do you get the ideas from? Some of you might already have an idea, but if you don't, there are ways of getting one. Of course, you might have a dream about something, and there you have an idea. But you need to look around your surroundings, really. And you can find something just even maybe looking out the window or whatever. There'll be something and you go, oh, there it is. But sometimes it's more like you're watching a movie, or you've read a book or something like that that's already finished. And you go, you know, what if this happened? Or maybe it could, if the ending was this, or they did this in here, I wonder what would happen. And so you kind of come up with that idea as well. And again, observing your surroundings in that. One of the ways I love to do, and it works with the dialogue you might need in your writing, is I love listening to conversations. So overhearing conversations that can be at family gatherings. It could be, I don't know, in an airport, in a mall, wherever you are. Sometimes you get these wonderful little phrases that trigger an idea for writing a story. And so they can also come, of course, from any activity or thing that you're doing as well. So it's really just a matter of letting some ideas flow and jotting them down. So what do you do when you have the idea? So now you have an idea, but how are you going to develop it? So one of the best ways that I've found is you can either write points of ideas that come out, but clustering. So that's a little diagram of what your main idea is, and then you have little circles or whatever shape you like, offshooting from that, writing down different ideas. Like, for instance, maybe you want to write something about a forest. So then you'd have another branch off of it would say something maybe about camping or fishing or whatever. And you kind of get those ideas, and then maybe you come up with something like danger, and it doesn't have to be a noun. It can be verbs, it can be adjectives, it can be anything really. It can be some kind of action going on. So you just sort of get your ideas together. And you kind of use that. You can keep using it. You can also use it for characters, which it works really well, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get there. So now you've got your ideas, and you've got a few suggestions around it, and maybe an idea of your story. Now, there are people who like to plot the whole thing, and they will maybe write an outline of everything, you know, every chapter and what's going to happen in every chapter, and they'll figure it all out before they start writing. And then there are other people, like myself, who actually we're what's called pantsers. So that means we kind of fly by the seat of our pants. And so we just start writing, and we don't worry about where the story's going, and we fix it later. Because really, no matter what you write, you have to edit and revise later. That's just the way it works. So whatever you choose to do, again, you can do an outline really briefly. You can do it even more so, a little paragraph for each chapter, or whatever you like. That kind of just gets you going. Now, as to the actual writing, so now you're ready to start, whichever way you're doing it. And for me, I like to start with a character, and I will go into their actions, their activities, or whatever, and I will let them lead me as to where the story goes. So it's important, actually, to know about your characters. So this might require, well, it does require maybe that whole clustering idea again. Decide who your character is, and So the protagonist is usually the more positive person, the one leading the story, and the antagonist is the other character who is causing the problems or distress or whatever it might be for your protagonist or your main character. When you're doing characters, one of the things you want to do is make them realistic. You don't want two-dimensional characters. You want them realistic. And so, as you know, characters actually are people in general, of course. We have all sides to us. So we have our likes, our dislikes. We have things that bring us joy, and we have things that we're scared of. And so your characters need to have all of those kinds of things and different attributes as well. Do they have different kinds of habits? Do they have favorite foods? Do they talk in a certain way? Do they look a little different? And by that I mean you can have a stereotypical kind of person, but you can add a little quirk to them or a little something or other. But you also need to change a little bit about their attitude. So they can have an attitude about a certain person or a certain activity or a certain idea that's going on in the world, or whether it's something like about the environment or something. Maybe they feel strongly one way or the other about something. What do they really like? Do they have a certain taste in music? Or do they really like art? Are they really into sports? What do they like? And of course they can have things that aren't congruent at all, and that's what makes your character more interesting, is if they have some different kinds of quirks or likes and dislikes. Also important, of course, is the backstory about your character. So is your character part of a family? Are they alone? What age are they? Do they have siblings? Do they have a really huge family? Do they have a small one? Are they close to their family? Both in terms of proximity, like do they live near their family? Or are they really distant? Or do they hardly ever see their family? Or their family is so close they pop in and out of each other's lives practically every day or something like that. Make them as realistic as you possibly can. Describing them, aside from giving your reader an idea of what their age is, whether they're, a young child or a teenager or a senior or whatever it might be, you don't really need to describe them at all. That's something that you can allow your reader to kind of envision, and they'll come up with their own ideas. If you want to do it, you certainly can. And if it's important to your story, like maybe your character has really unruly, curly red hair, for instance, and she absolutely hates it, and that causes a major problem throughout the story, well, then of course that would be very important to include. However, there's lots of times it doesn't really matter and doesn't enter into it. So again, in order to get your character figured out, start with the cluster or a point form or whatever you like, and just start adding little attributes about them. And think about things that they might be scared of. Ask yourself something like, what would they have in their pocket right now? Or, how do they feel about something that you feel strongly about? And either make it the same or make it totally different. Or maybe they're indifferent altogether. So character is one of your main driving forces in your story. So they're important to figure out something. And of course, even though you're writing down all of these things and keeping track of what they're like, you're not going to use it all. But you need to have that backstory so you get to know your character really well. I mean, maybe they even have pets or something like that, and that will enter into the story at some point. But it's the same as if you need to do any research for your story. Sometimes you're writing about something you're maybe not quite totally familiar with, and you need to look up something. And well, you can do that. I often do research, and I do far too much research. And I know I can't use it all. But it's good to have that knowledge, and it sort of informs you as you're writing. So that's something you might want to consider doing as well. Sometimes I actually think I know it, but I want to make sure, and I want to call it the right terminology. It could be just about anything that you're writing about. You want to, have a bit of research. And of course, the internet is a great place to to get information, and the library with books and all that kind of thing. I also talk to experts at times. So I might, if I need to know something in geology, for instance, or something about tall sailing ships, like I did for my young adult novel, I will actually, email or call them, or sometimes I'll even do whatever it is that I'm doing. I actually went on a tall sailing ship to experience what that was like, so that I could write about it more authentically. I also get people to review things after I've written. For instance, my one series of books about juvenile fiction is about dinosaurs and going back in time to dinosaurs and things. And I actually talked to the paleontologist, and my story is set down in southwestern Saskatchewan. And so I was able to talk to the paleontologist there and get some real hands-on experience and all of that, so I could write about it. So writing a good opening hook can come right at the very beginning as you're planning your story, or it can come a little bit later. And your opening hook should be something that's going to entice the reader and make them want to read more. And so you want to have some sort of action. Action is always a great place to start. Dialogue is another place to start, something really important. Something intriguing, something mood setting. Starting with description of somewhere doesn't work very well, unless you've already opened with dialogue or an action. It can be, something really simple, like, watch out behind you, anything like that. And then you can then go on to talk about where somebody is or whatever to get that description in. So it's important to do that and get the readers right involved in your story. And then as you progress, as I say, you either are going to be following your outline of the way you hope the story would go, or as in how I write, I let my characters kind of lead me. I mean, I sort of have an idea of the story, of course, but I often don't know. By the time I get to the middle of the book that I'm writing, I have no idea really how it's going to end sometimes. And I know it's always going to end and it'll be fine, but I'm also not worried about it. And this is something that I think you need to keep in mind when you're writing. You don't need to worry about punctuation and grammar and sentence structure and all that kind of thing. Not at the beginning. The whole idea is to let your writing flow. So you just start writing. Just start, and just wherever it takes you, let it go. And then as you do this more and more often, more will come to you and it will become easier. And the idea is not to stop your thought processes and just let the thoughts take you where you need to go with your writing. And as I say, you're going to end up revising it again later, because actually writing something, the first draft of something, is really about 20% of the whole process. The rest of it, the 80%, is editing and revising, and that's all part of it. So you're going to continue writing then as when you can. But now I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the whole writing kind of thing. When you write, sometimes it's a really good idea to have a certain time of day or days of the week or whatever that you write, and get into the kind of the habit of writing, if this is something you truly want to do. And set time aside for yourself so that you have that time to write. And pretty soon your brain is going to realize, oh yeah, it's writing time, and it's going to kick into gear and off you go with your story. And it doesn't have to be a long time. I mean, we all have activities, family, work, or whatever we do, and you don't always have a set time or a set length of time. But sometimes even like 5 or 10 minutes a day makes all the difference. You write one sentence a day, and pretty soon you have a chapter, and then the next thing you know, you've got several chapters, and then a whole book. So take your time with it, but at the same time, let it flow. And then you also would probably benefit if you have a certain writing space that you use, or place that you use. Often it's a quieter place. For me anyway, I like quiet. Some people might like to have some music in the background, or maybe they don't mind the outside noises, from an open window or whatever. But you choose, you figure it out. And I mean, sometimes you have to experiment, with times of day when you write, with where you write. Sometimes, you could maybe even write by hand with a notebook or whatever. I sometimes do that. I'll go outside and sit and write. by hand. For the most part, I do write with a computer, and I suppose lots of people will. Computer, laptop, tablet, whatever it is that you have might be what you prefer. Absolutely nothing wrong with doing everything by hand and then, you know, getting it typed up later or whatever. But the whole thing is consistency. If you can get into a habit and be consistent, it works really well. So now I'm going to get into a little bit about the words and what you're using, and a bit about the structure. So stories, it doesn't matter if you're writing a short story. Well, it could be nonfiction as well, whether you're writing a novel, novelette, whatever. You always have to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. That sounds simple enough, but sometimes it doesn't always feel that simple. But what you're doing is you're trying to have, your main character has to have some kind of conflict along the way. So you're going to add conflict as you go in your story. So the first, say, 10 pages or something of a chapter or a novel or whatever might be the introduction kind of, but introducing the problem as well. And the key thing is to keep these problems, additional problems either, or you can escalate whatever problems or conflicts they might have. And the story continues on throughout the middle until you get to a climax. And then you have a turning point. And that's when there might still be some other problem, but they overcome it this time. And then you go into the denouement, or the, you know, wrapping the story up, you know, at the ending. Always keep in mind that there are other structures besides the three-part beginning, middle, and end, but those work the best. You can also have subplots. So if you're writing fiction, and especially a novel, you might have a main story arc about your main character, but there might be a secondary character that's there. There might be a secondary kind of problem or situation that might need to be overcome, that kind of thing. You also want to make sure that your characters have an arc. So it isn't just the story, it's your characters. They need to grow. So you want to start them out with whatever problem it is, whatever, and where they're at. But as they go along, they find out more about themselves, and they realize that they can actually overcome some of these things, or they have to get really, really tough, or maybe it's a situation where they need to get softer. It just depends what the situation is and what your story is. But either way, your character needs to grow in some way. And so by the end, they have transformed from what they were at the beginning in some way. And usually it's a strengthened way. Sometimes, of course, it depends on the story. It's not. maybe it's to their detriment or whatever. But so you can have their story arc. You also can have other characters and other character arcs and have those going on at once. Like maybe there's a younger sister or something going on, or that has problems going on and is working with the main character. Maybe your protagonist, that protagonist is going to grow as well and change in some way. So getting into the actual writing of it then, when you're writing, it's best to use active verbs. So instead, passive verbs really don't do a whole lot, and gerunds don't do a lot. Like he was swimming. Instead of saying that's pretty passive and all of that, he swam hard. Or if you're talking about somebody going to a park, it's not he went to the park or he walked to the park. Make something far more active and vivid. So, he jogged to the park, he raced to the park, or whatever it might be. You want to have a more active verb in there for anything that you're writing, as much as you can, and make it as active and not passive as something is happening to somebody, as they're actually doing it. That works really well to keep your readers engaged and keep them going into your story even more. Other things that you can do, of course, are putting a little bit more detail in. So instead of saying he drove down the highway to the next town, you would write, he sped along number 1 highway to Melfort. And you see how much more detail there is in that, and people can actually visualize that a whole lot better, and that engages your audience so much more. The key thing in every scene, every story, every chapter, wherever you go, is to keep in mind what are known as the 5 W's, and I also add how. So the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, when, why, and how. Those are really good to be able to be answered throughout your story. They may pop up in different ways, but it's good to have those in consideration to make sure your audience, your readers, know where you're at every point. The other thing is, and this I think is really, really crucial, is to have the 5 senses. So you want to be able to, I mean, the obvious one, of course, is seeing. We write about it, and so people can visualize it, and our characters are seeing something. But what are they touching? What are they hearing? What are they feeling? You know, all of those kinds of things. Are they tasting something? And I have to admit, tasting is often, unless it's a scene with something eating or something, is often pretty difficult to do. But maybe they're tasting the salty air or something like that if they're out by the seaside. But try and put as much of the senses as possible in your reading, in your writing rather, so that the people reading can really get totally immersed in your story, because that's the whole idea. You want them to be there with you the whole way. Of course, in writing a story, you also have dialogue, and dialogue is key to your story. However, if you have dialogue that doesn't say anything, doesn't move the story forward, doesn't give you information about a character, then it doesn't belong in your story. So you want to avoid those kinds of dialogues or exchanges with your characters that really don't say much. Is sort of like, oh, the tide is high today, whatever, and your character says yes. That really doesn't do anything for you. So you need, it needs to be something else that's going to move the story along. So they might say instead, that's going to make it really tricky for Evan to get here on time, or something like that. So you're going to add something that's going to move your story along. In the actual physical writing of dialogue, there are double quote marks around everything that anybody says. The punctuation goes inside the quote mark at the end, so it would be quotation marks, what they say, comma, or question mark, or whatever it might be, and then the quote marks again. And then your tagline, which might be said Peter, or whatever, or something like that. The taglines, that's important too. So use said as much as you can, actually. Nobody notices it. If you start using too many adverbs or something like that, said saucily, said quickly, or instead of saying said, rambled on, or whatever. It's good to use those kinds of things once in a while, certainly, but you don't need to overdo them. You don't have to think that you have to come up with something different every time. Said works perfectly fine. And you can do them the opposite way around. Instead of saying said Peter, you can say Peter said. And it also gives you a nice segue then into some action as well. Peter said as he moved the glass off the table, or something like that. So, or said Peter moving the glass, or whatever. So you can change the order around a little bit. One thing you have to keep in mind is every time a new person speaks, there is a new paragraph. Dialogue is indented, it's a paragraph, and as soon as one person is done speaking, whatever comes next, it's a new paragraph. Whoever speaks next, it's a new paragraph. And that's really important to have, because your reader needs to know who's talking. If there are 2 characters consistently in your scene, you don't always have to name them, because they'll be able to tell often, but every once in a while you want to interject maybe with some sort of action or a name or something like that. You also want to make the dialogue sort of noticeable about which person is speaking, because maybe they speak in a certain way. They might be very particular about how they speak, and they do not use contractions or something like that. So then people, that are reading, they can see that that's that kind of character, whereas the other character might be saying all those things, really quickly, or with short sentences, or whatever it might be. There might be a bit of an accent, but again, don't overdo that. A little bit here and there. If your character does have some certain way of talking, that's okay, but you don't need to put too much in. That kind of detracts, and you lose your reader. They find it hard, and they have to keep going back and figuring out what it is that is being said. So you don't need to do that at all. So dialogue, again, if it doesn't say anything, doesn't move your story forward, doesn't give some kind of direction or shape, or move your character, or give information about your character, you really don't need it. But again, when you're writing, don't worry about any of these things. You just keep writing. And because once you get to the end, and that's your whole purpose, you want to keep writing right to the end. Don't keep going back and revising. That's something I've caught myself doing a few times. It's like you've got the first chapter done. You don't go back and start revising it. I've done that over and over and over again, but then you never move on. What you really need to do is just keep writing, and you can worry about it later. And if you're one of those people who has been plotting and planning how your story out, you've already got it figured out, and if it changes, that's fine. There's nothing that says you have to stick with what you originally thought, because again, sometimes your story, you get other ideas, your story takes another turn, your characters, you see how your characters could act differently or do something different, or whatever it might be, and you want to add another element. It doesn't matter, but you just keep writing and writing until you get to the end. And then that's when you start looking at revising. Again, I can't say that enough. That's just so key. Some of just speaking about setting and narration of your story. Again, setting narration between the dialogue. You don't need a lot of it either. It just depends on your style. You can use whatever you like. I know some books, some authors, like in their books, they have a lot of description about a place or what's going on, or where things are happening or whatever. But that's their style. And those ones I often will skip over some of it if it just seems to be a really long passage or several pages of description, But some people love to read that, love to write it, and that's just fine. It's just as long as it keeps your story moving. And so when you do that, this brings us to setting. So what is your setting of your story? This is something you kind of need to decide from the outset. It's sort of like, what genre are you writing? Yes, is it going to be mystery, romance, thriller, whatever it might be, memoir, whatever. So as long as you know what it is, you want to set the mood. And even a memoir will have a mood, but we're mostly talking about fiction here. So your story could take place over many years or days or hours, whatever you like, and many places as well, and many seasons. It just does, whatever does your story justice is what you really want to use. And a good idea to figure that out before you start as well. But of course you can do that as you go along. As you can do all of these things as you go along. Nothing is written in stone from the beginning. But your setting is important, and it should match pretty much what your story is about, the kind of the mood about it, of your story. Another consideration about setting is, again, depending on your story. If it's a fantasy, maybe it's not on this planet. It might not be on Earth. It might be somewhere totally different. And you need to, again, figure out your environment for what that might be. It could be something you've made up, or it could be a real place. Even if you're using real places, real cities, lakes, whatever you're using, you can name them or not. You can make up your own names and just kind of base it on that. I often make up my own names unless it's really relevant to the story. But it's entirely up to you what you do. And again, that comes in revising. You can always change it. Sometimes I put in the real place until I'm done, and then I just change all of them to something else. And that's perfectly fine. One other consideration is about your point of view. Are you going to write it in first person, or are you going to write it in third person? Now, first person is totally from your main character's point of view, so as if you were an I. So it's I, I, we, that kind of thing that they're doing, and they can only see what they can see. So you can't write about anything else that the main character can't see if it's in first person. What they can't see, what they can't hear, all of that. It just doesn't work. It really is disruptive to the reader, to the story, and that. So it's something you should experiment with, though, and I think a lot of writers do write in first person, and it can be very, very effective. There's second person that says you, this, but it doesn't work very well for most things. That's more potentially for essays or instructions or something like that. Although people have done it successfully as well. Third person, there are several kinds of third person points of view as well. There's the omniscient, which then you as the narrator, as a writer, you can see and hear and write about everything that's going on, and that works really well. Or you can have it so your main character is it's still third person, but it's your main character is only seeing certain things as well. You can switch from character to character, but not advisable in the middle of a scene. It's really, it just doesn't work very well. It's very hard to do. I did a couple of books that way, and I've decided I wouldn't do it again. But because it's so much easier, and to me, more fun to go in third person limited is usually what I do. But again, it's best if you experiment with whether you're going to go first person or third person. And try everything that you're doing, whether it's dialogue, the character description, or some interaction, this description of the scene or whatever. Try all of them in first and third person, or whatever else you would like to try. And so as you're writing then, you just keep writing and let everything unfold. And then at some point you get to what you think is sort of the end of your story. You need to take a bit of a break, and then you start looking at it again and you start thinking about, okay, how can I make this better? And you're going to start looking at revising it and editing, and it kind of goes hand in hand to do both, but the final edit will happen after you've done your major revisions. And sometimes it may not need a lot of revising, and sometimes it will. It all depends. I've also written whole chapters that in the end have come out. They just didn't need to be there. But none of it is a waste. It doesn't matter that you write way more than you need. It's practice, and practice is really, really imperative. So I never look at something that I need to cut as like either a mistake or a problem, or sometimes I'm not happy I have to take it out, but for the sake of the story, you have to edit, you have to revise, and things have to come out. You want your story to be as concise and as clear as it possibly can. You want to make sure every sentence, every word means something and moves your story forward. If there's words that you don't need, that you've just kind of added on, whether they're adverbs, adjectives, some extra description or extra dialogue or whatever, can you tighten the dialogue? You look at various things, and where can you tighten your story? And that will give you a good sense also as you're doing that about how your story hangs together. And double check if you do have that beginning, middle, and end, and if the conflict is rising or whatever. Is there too much conflict? Is there not enough? Do you need to make it stronger? You can just take an overview of your whole story and do it that way. At some point then eventually you will be editing, and you could be editing as you're revising, and in that then you're going to be looking at your sentence structure, and you're going to be looking at punctuation and grammar and all of that kind of thing, because then it becomes important. And there are lots of checklists for how to edit and what to look for, and it's always a good idea too to have somebody read your material when you're ready, not right away, but when you feel that you're kind of ready and would like some feedback. It's great if somebody can read it. And somebody that's going to be honest with you, though, and that isn't going to just say they love it regardless, because you want some honesty about what it is. Is it working? Does the story make sense? Is it flowing? Is it too broken up? Where can things be made smoother and flow? And because that's your whole objective, to make the story flow and to keep your readers engaged. Another key thing that will help you with your writing is that you observe the world around you. We talked about that a little bit before, but when you're not writing, just be observant. Listen to what's going on around you. Observe the weather, nature, what's going on in the news, just the whole world around you, the dialogue, people. Look at mannerisms. Notice what people are wearing. Just absolutely look at whatever is going on around you. Take a notebook with you. I carry a notebook all the time, and you think you're going to remember, but mostly you don't. And these days, of course, I also take photographs of different places or whatever. But there might be just something really that catches your eye or your ear, and it's just really good to be observant. And you never know when you're going to be able to use that in your story. The key things when you're writing, starting to write, read. Read. That is just so important, is to read. And practice writing everything, anything, it just doesn't matter. Just keep doing it, and just let the creativity flow, and let it be fun. Yes, writing can be hard work, but it's also fun, and just play around with it, and just have fun with it, and just keep writing.